This episode is proudly sponsored by Main Street Magazine. Mary, it's the last Moxie Monday of 2024. How do you feel about that?
I feel pretty good.
Yes.
Although we are entering that holiday season and all the rushing and stress that goes with it. And that's why I'm really happy about this guest, our last guest of 24. It's Sara Cousins, who you know.
I do.
Because she has been our kind of go-to mental health person for Main Street Magazine articles the past decade.
Yeah.
And she is a licensed clinical social worker who operates out of Lakeville, Connecticut. Mm-hmm. She was a philosophy major in college at Fordham, which is something that I find especially interesting. And she specializes in relational and couples therapy, and she draws a lot on Eastern traditions for mindfulness and meditation to incorporate into her practice. So I thought she'd be a really good person to help us get through the holidays.
Hopefully she has some insights and, to help those who might especially need it.
Like you and me.
I'm taking notes. I don't know about you.
Absolutely. I know she's going to have some good advice because she's a wise and experienced professional.
She is. Well, let's dive in.
Let's do it. Sara, welcome to Main Street Moxie.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you, especially during this emotionally loaded holiday season. But first, before we get into all your wisdom, we need to hear how you define Moxie.
Moxie. When I think about that word, I think about an equally hard to define word, which is chutzpah.
Yes.
And I think about courage, and I think about individuality as it's an expression of power and each person's unique way that they express that.
So that kind of plays very nicely into the next question, which is a little different for you because this is an episode dedicated to getting through the holidays. How could someone use that definition, do you think, and come through the holidays sane and intact?
Well,
all right, that's a tall order.
That is a tall
wow, Mary.
order. I think there's a lot in there. I think about Moxie in terms of the word courage. And when I think about courage, it's very different than being tough. I think about courage means you're afraid and you do it anyway because you believe in yourself or you believe in something or there's something you can hold on to. And so if you're looking forward to a holiday season that might be challenging or even uncomfortable, that you can be afraid and uncomfortable and do it anyway because you have Moxie.
Okay, so now we have to get to the meat of the matter. How does that happen?
How do you do it?
How do you do it? So, for example, rampant consumerism, and you don't want to buy into that. What are some techniques or advice that you would have as a mental health professional to help people navigate all the pitfalls of the holidays?
I, like so many current contemporary psychotherapists and people in mental health, I'm pretty embedded in a mindfulness strategy. And I think that a big part of kind of finding the resources to do just what you're talking about, say around consumerism, is to quiet yourself enough to find your authentic values. It's so easy for us to be bombarded externally. And how do we quiet that and find the internal values, the internal motivations, the internal definitions, whether that's a definition of family, that's a definition of holiday, that's a definition of celebration. We all have those definitions. Often they're unexamined. So how do we quiet ourselves, distance ourselves a little bit from the external definitions of those words, get in touch with our own internal definition of what celebration, what family, what holiday means, and land in that so that we hold on to that as opposed to just responding to the external stimulus.
So is it about finding the things that actually matter most to you during the holidays, and instead of keeping up with the Joneses, or, Mary had mentioned social media being a part of it. So instead of chasing that, like really dialing down into the core of what you feel for yourself and your family?
Yes, definitely. And my undergrad training was in philosophy, as Mary.
Yes.
I defer to Mary on this a little bit, but my undergrad is in philosophy, and I think that we're all philosophers. We all have definitions. We all have frameworks that we use. Often they're unexamined and unexplored. So it's about just kind of quieting your mind or the external world enough that you can get in touch with those. What are your values? What are your motivations?
That sounds simple enough, but while you're saying, I'm thinking, but I just feel like certainly some days we're so bombarded with expectations and pressures I feel like it takes a lot of courage, to go back to your definition, to be able to kind of say no to that. Whether it's your own parents or your kids, like how to navigate that, I feel like might be more challenging for some than others. So how do you just stay true to that? To try to just be like, here's my boundary? Is it about boundaries?
Yeah, I think it definitely can be about boundaries. But to go back to the first part of your question, I think that's something we all struggle with. Yeah. And I think it's more about, like waves. It's not a one and done kind of thing. Right. So if you're going to spend Thanksgiving with one half of your family and Christmas has completely different meaning to you and you're going to spend it with different family, those anchors that you hold on to internally may be different in different situations. If you have a profound loss of a family member that you always spend Christmas with, that might be different, the thing that you have to dig down deep and hold on to, than, say, around a different celebration, maybe Thanksgiving or even different holidays, depending on your religion, that fall within this holiday season. And I think it's a lot about, it's a constant process. It's not a one and done. So if you're holding on to a value of, I just want to feel connected to my family, even though it's imperfect, even though they have disappointed me in the past. That's not just a decision you wake up on Tuesday morning and make. That's something you keep coming back to and landing in, and you keep coming back and landing.
So let me paint a picture for you. I'm at Target. I've got my child's Excel spreadsheet of what they want, and I don't believe that this is how I want this to roll out. And you and I, when we were preparing for this, talked about not waiting until you're in that crisis moment to develop these awarenesses. To maybe it's around other purchases throughout the year where you're laying the groundwork for these values. So can you talk about that a little bit, about how to use mindfulness when you're feeling robust and healthy, so that when you get to a situation that requires it, you're ready to roll? Is that something you can?
Yeah, but I'd like to also talk about that moment in Target with the spreadsheet.
Oh, please do.
Because I think that's, in so many ways, something as parents or even just family members, if you don't have children, can relate to, which is about how we can lose a handle on our inner anchors and our inner values and our inner definitions, and having compassion for yourself and patience with yourself, that one day you're standing in the aisle, the toy aisle at Target, holding that spreadsheet. It's like a wake-up moment. It's like, oh, wait a minute, how did I end up here? Oh, yeah, that's right, because we all do. We all lose our way. I woke up this morning and I kind of knew I was going to think about how I didn't want this holiday to be all about consumerism, and yet suddenly I find myself in the toy aisle at Target. That's okay. We all land in that place, whether that's a metaphor or that's an actual place we land. And I think a big part of it is it goes back to what I was saying before. It's an ongoing process of re-landing. It's not a one and done thing. And also, too, because we change and we grow and we change our definitions and we have to negotiate with lots of other people. We might say, oh, I'm going to spend, Christmas with my relatives who are very into consumer culture.
Right.
How do I attend that event with my children in a way that holds on to my values and respects that I'm going to be in their home. Mm-hmm. How do we make a balance there? We can be true to ourselves and be in a situation that may make us uncomfortable or may challenge our beliefs, right? Because often we have conflicting values there. We want to hold true to our value of not participating in consumerism, but we have a real interest in being connected to our family and fitting in and pleasing our family and living traditions. And maybe it's always been the tradition that this is a kind of a crazy object-filled holiday, but we've changed and we've grown and we've refocused our values. But how do we still stay connected to traditions or the family that we love and respect the houses that we're going to be in?
I find it also a lot of inner child stuff. When you say you might have changed, so you move away from your family, you go through and you evolve in ways that make sense to you, and then you're all brought back together, and it's like all those roles are just come to life again of when you were younger. And how do you, if I were to say, oh, I don't believe in any present giving around the holidays, and then you get to your sibling's house and you take some heat for those positions. And how do you still get through that moment and brush it off or I don't know. I find those moments very hard to navigate because everyone's grown up in different ways, but we all return back and then adopt some of those birth order or sibling relationships again. I don't know if I'm being very clear in what I'm talking about.
No, I get what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, even down to, I'm vegetarian now,
Yeah.
or I'm vegan, or whatever.
Or somebody who marries outside of the family religion and wants to bring that person in, or outside of the family culture and wants to bring that person in. And how do they feel safe doing that, even though it might be uncomfortable and scary? I think to your question, which I love, because I think it's so typical of that a family, people grow up, they marry, they have their own crazy kids or their own difficult partners or whatever it is we bring together. Or maybe it's more of a chosen family group, right? Because they can be also challenging. That I kind of think of it to your point, Mary, that we kind of bring our multiple personalities to these events. We show up as our 35-year-old self or our 45-year-old self, but we pack in our bag in our car our 10-year-old self, our pouty 6-year-old, our wounded, angry 15-year-old.
Right.
And we all show up, and everybody else in the family has brought those parts of themselves too.
It's a crowded room.
It's a very, very crowded room. And your 6-year-old is responding to, this one's 15-year-old.
Right.
And I think that just knowing that that's going on and being kind of kind to yourself and kind to the others that are also struggling with all that, and trying to maybe bring some humor and compassion to it, to not only the parts of ourselves, but also the parts that our family members and extended family members are bringing as well. And that there's a lot of kind of habitual acting out as a result of that. And maybe just trying to bring some awareness and kindness instead of, seeing everything as some kind of call to arms. Maybe your brother divorced your favorite sister-in-law and now he's bringing this year's model and you want to punish him or pout about it or teach him a lesson. Or you could just meet the moment. And you could just say, wow, I miss my old sister-in-law. I'm so sad. But punishing the new sister-in-law isn't going to change anything.
Right.
Acting out isn't going to do anything but make me feel out of control. How do I just meet this moment? And ultimately, it's all about connection. That's what we're seeking. We're seeking connection. And how do you have that so that you don't cut your nose off to spite your face?
I could try all this. No, seriously. I want to go back to what you said about connection, but in the face of difference. And there's a lot of difference in our society today where we're kind of That's been the mantra, that we're so different, we're so different, we're so different, and you don't see it like me, and I don't see it like you, and you like turkey, and I like ham, and whatever it is. I guess mindfulness is the way that you keep that umbrella of connection open. How do you bridge a difference with someone who's not that interested in bridging? Because it takes two to tango and to be nice and connect. And I don't know, how do you have any suggestions for that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think it goes back to, expectations, right? So I might come into a situation and think, wow, I may want to connect with the people in this room. How can I do that to the best of my ability, even though a lot of them judge me? Some of them don't like me. A lot of them disagree with me about everything from the fact that maybe I've become a vegan or maybe I've opted out of the family religion. I may go into that room anticipating judgment, fear, discomfort, disconnection. Those are all real things. And I can lean into, I want to be connected to them. I often think about it in terms, this is just the way I think about it, is in terms of DNA. How much of our DNA is almost identical to every human in this world that we meet. They're just like me, except for like a 0.00 something. And we may look on the outside and say, well, that person is very different from me. They hang out with a different group of people. They believe a different thing. They dress differently. They eat different food. And we can get all caught up in that. And I think about the Pema Chodron line where she says, just like me. How can you think about all the people that you meet? They're just like me. They love their children. They want to be happy. They want to pay their bills. They'd like to be successful. They're doing the best they can. They too have values. Some of them may be different than mine. But the just like me is about me trying to find the connection in that room with these people, even when there's a lot of difference.
So is it a matter of just reminding ourselves we're more alike than different?
Yeah,
and stop focusing on the differences?
Yeah, not
instead?
focusing. Because focusing on the differences is, to Mary's point, a kind of reflection of where we feel like this moment is in our history, which is one of disconnection, right? The irony and the paradox of living in a world of social media, which is supposed to connect us. And yet we have some of the loneliest, most disconnected people, even the ones that are supposed to be being connected through it. Teenagers and young people are often the ones that feel the loneliest and the most disconnected. So how do we deal with those paradoxes and still bridge those chasms of difference? Well, we can just say, I can do that. I can show up in this moment and I can try and find those similarities. I can try and find those just like me places of connection instead of, to your point, Thorn, of hyper-focusing on the difference.
Right. I feel like in today's society that's something that has become the focus, that, the differences are being pointed out so much instead of the just like me. I think that's created, more of a divisive situation in our community and cultures and even in our families, unfortunately. But something you brought up about loneliness. Now, on average, people think of the holidays, they think of, holiday classic movies, getting together, eating a meal, some, the commercialism of, the gift buying and whatnot. So some people might be like, what are you guys talking about, stress and loneliness? I think it's become more of a commonality that this is happening to people. And we mentioned it briefly a couple of times, but how grief plays into the holidays. How would you talk to people about that? How does that manifest for some people? And what are some of the things we can do to maybe recognize it in loved ones who might be struggling? Or if we ourselves are I've lost a grandmother or, or our spouse. How do we navigate through that time so we don't become more isolated, as you were saying before?
Yeah. Grief is such an interesting thing because even in the examples you're talking about, we tend to think about grief. It just becomes this word that we make an association, has to do with loss and death, right? But there's so many ways that people may grieve because life is impermanence and it's constant change, whether that's your kids growing up and getting married and the grief of, losing those moments in time where you felt so connected and you felt so much joy and you were just looking to the future. And maybe now somebody feels grief that those times are past them. Obviously, there's the examples of maybe you've lost somebody to death, and that is very real. But losses are so complicated and sometimes so hard to articulate. So I think just being aware of it in our loved ones, that they may be grieving things we don't even know. We could be around people over the holidays who are dealing with some kind of loss or tragedy that they are ashamed or afraid to talk about and acknowledge. So just because they're not acknowledging it doesn't mean that they're not in a place of grieving something. And I think also, too, about loneliness, that grief, loneliness, sadness, these are all just part of the human condition. And I think we also live in a culture that thinks these are the bad emotions. And if you've got it all together and you're running, and you're staying busy and you're moving forward, and that you won't have these feelings. And so I think we can, if we are experiencing grief or loneliness or sadness, we might not talk about it because we might feel like, oh, I must not be doing something right if I have these feelings. Or there's this kind of tinge of maybe failure. And so there's an avoidance of expressing it. So what you were saying, Thorin, makes me think that maybe it's just about being aware that the people we are maybe spending time with over the holidays, maybe having some of those deep feelings and afraid to talk about them, acknowledge them, and maybe just being aware of them.
Reminds me of those on Instagram from time to time. It would be like what you know about a person is like a pinpoint in a huge circle that you make all these assumptions and you really have no idea what's going on in their lives or in their day or what they're dealing with. And I try to remind myself of that I really don't know what burdens people could be carrying. What about the person that is literally alone for the holidays? Like, what would you say to them if they just find themselves without people to connect with for whatever reason?
Well, I think that brings up all kinds of complicated assumptions, right? Because sometimes people are alone doesn't mean they're lonely.
Correct.
And some people who are around other people may feel very lonely. So maybe even just kind of exploring those assumptions or those projections. If somebody is alone around the holidays, they may feel very connected to their spirituality, to their values, or maybe they're even somebody, to what Thorin was talking about before, somebody who has, in a positive way, opted out of some crazy.
Right.
And they may actually be very grounded people. And if they're choosing to kind of de-stress by decluttering their lives with values or things and directions that they don't want to participate in, that could actually be from a real place of strength. In terms of acknowledging loneliness or sadness around the holidays, I think a lot of it is empathy, right? Keeping your eyes open, your mind open, your curiosity open, so that you feel safe enough to acknowledge, right? If I know that what my loneliness or my sadness or my grieving or my disconnection looks and feels like, and I think I might see it in somebody else, taking the moxie and the courage to ask, to be curious. If that person says, no, I don't feel those things, I'm actually feeling really good. Say, okay, well, thank you. I appreciate that. I wanted to check in. So taking that initiative to connect and be curious and ask.
It sounds so simple.
It does.
Maybe it's because as a therapist, I'm so used to asking people personal questions.
Yeah, right.
I just assume everyone can do it.
That's true. This episode is proudly sponsored by Main Street Magazine. Main Street Magazine is a monthly magazine and a website with daily content, and we love to feature people, places, and things that make our community special. To learn more, please visit our website, www.mainstreetmag.com. Something you said before about sadness, loneliness, that there's a negative stigma about it. But you were saying we feel those things. Why should they be viewed in a negative way? And it really, while we've been talking the last 10 minutes, I keep going back to that in my mind. It's such a good point. Like, we all go through moments of where we just, nothing may be wrong. We're just having a day where we're feeling emotional, or we might just, we may have watched a movie that really affected us, so we're feeling sad. Why is that such a bad thing in our culture then? Why not have that be as accepted as when we're happy?
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's kind of what we were talking about and what Mary was talking about the Instagram culture that we live in, that there's this constant desire to have a sheen, and that an association with failure, or that you've got something going on that's that is going to make other people uncomfortable.
Right,
so you should hide it.
Right.
And one of the great lessons that I learned years ago at a training, I don't know if this was Tara Brach, who's a fabulous psychotherapist and meditation trainer, who said, we have all these feelings. Maybe it's grief, maybe it's anger, maybe it's hurt, maybe it's disappointment. And we think that these are the bad feelings and we shouldn't feel them. And she says, well, actually, you feel those feelings not because you're doing something wrong, but because you have a pulse. And someday you won't have a pulse and you won't have those feelings.
There is that.
That's true.
So you might as well make a home for those feelings and bring them in instead of trying to push them out. Bring them in. They're yours.
Yeah, I tend to be a pusher. I shouldn't be feeling this way. And I tend to have a holiday of absolutes. The shoulds and oughts really, really are at the gates. And I'm trying to, stay in the moment. And I feel like when I'm well rested and well fed and feeling robust, I can kind of come into that mindful place. But when I stop taking care of myself, it's like it all goes to whatever. And so I think that self-care and recognizing when you're tired and when you haven't had a really healthy meal and you haven't taken a walk outside, what kind of techniques to help to trigger these self-check-ins? Because I think you started off the episode with checking in and being aware. How do you build, what's a practical strategy to remind yourself before you find yourself down at the bottom of a rabbit hole?
I'm going to back that out a little bit, because I think, like your story before about finding yourself in the toy aisle at Target, it's like we will find ourselves in those moments of anger, despair, frustration, and kind of what you were describing before is kind of that when we fall into that black and white thinking, that all or nothing thinking. And we can talk about how not to land there, but it's kind of inevitable that we're going to land there. So how can we just be kind to ourselves when we land there and say, oh yeah, here I go in that black and white thinking. Here I am going, I'm not going to Uncle Joe's for Thanksgivings. Forget about him. He, was mean to me earlier in the year. We can get into that black and white thinking. when we get into that black and white thinking, just being aware of it, because it's usually kind of a fight or flight response. And it's probably indicative of us not taking care of ourselves, not in a judgmental way, but just in the accumulation of everyday life way, that life can just erode us and kick us around.
I hear you.
And it's not that we're doing something wrong. It's more like, oh yeah, that's right. I live in the world and sometimes it's really hard. Okay, how can I start in this moment to take care of myself? I can't go back in time and say, I should have gone to a spa last Friday and not gone to work. Well, we can't do that. Right. So how can we, in this moment, start the process of taking care of ourselves? And part of that, I think, is just acknowledging that you're here because, again, you have a pulse and you live in the world. And the world is sometimes a really hard and painful and tough place to live, where we're holding on to ourselves and our loved ones while hurtling through space. And I don't know how fast we're going, but it's pretty fast. And then just start in that moment, whether that's just taking a pause, stepping back, thinking, not being hard on yourself, not judging yourself, going back to those fundamental values that you have, holding on to those and coming from those. And maybe it's about being in nature for some people. Maybe it's about looking at art for other people. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's about snuggling up on the couch and eating popcorn for somebody else. It's about feeling good and feeling good in our bodies, feeling okay with ourselves.
Going off what you said, I want to ask you something from what you said before, Mary.
Oh, wait, this is, I don't get asked the questions on the podcast.
Just a quick one. You said sometimes you say to yourself, I should be happy right now, or I should feel this way or that way. What is it is it societal pressure or how does this, factor into what we're talking? I think it's a very big, important thing to about the general conversation we're having. It's this pressure of I should X, Y, or Z.
Well, I think it's probably the social media or the Hallmark movie
right.
of the candlelight and the perfect table setting and everything's coming out at the same time. It's not like global things. It's these little things where I'm like, but I planned that to the T and it didn't work the way it was supposed to. It should have happened. Mm-hmm. And I think I kind of get hung up on this idealized version.
Right. And
that detracts from my able to be in the moment because I'm living up in this ideal, this platonic ideal, Sarah, of what the holiday-ness, and then I'm not really in the holiday and enjoying whatever it is. So I think that's where it's coming from me.
So is it this expectation that we're putting, and I'm talking generally, that, it's a keeping up with the Joneses. It's the Instagram reel of like this beautiful place setting. Is it, I think probably a societal thing, is it if we don't conform to that, we can't be happy? We can't be X, Y, or Z? Do you guys think we've gotten sadly to that point? And that's impacting our mental health a little bit?
Do you want the truth? Yeah, I think we're there.
Yeah.
I think also back to Sarah's point about how much we have in common.
Yeah. Our
society is made, and maybe other societies too, but this is the one I live in, made by being a differentiator, an interrupter, something like when you're trying to get a job, you have to find your secret sauce and what makes you different. And I think that there's a lot of emphasis on trying to, and I also think it's a survival technique. Like I have this pet theory about siblings, which you could tell me if it's right or not, that just to be noticed, like a survival, just to be noticed, you make yourself that much different from your other siblings, whether you're the wild one or you're the studious one or you're the athletic one, because you need to be noticed in some way. So you're not just one of a herd, you're an individual. And so there's this tension of trying to focus on what connects us with also this drive to differentiate. And I find that to be a struggle in myself sometimes when I'm trying to have that more Buddhist connected feeling with this more capitalist differentiating feeling. So I think that goes larger than the holidays. But anyway, Sarah? Please.
Well, I don't
opine.
know. You packed like the entire first year of my grad school into everything from connectedness to differentiation to dysfunctional families and the roles that we play. And when I say dysfunctional families, everybody on some level, it's sometimes family is dysfunctional, and that doesn't mean that they're wrong or bad. It just means that we have a lot of moments to meet in the trajectory of our family's history. And so I think that there are a lot of concepts there that are all going on at the same time. How do we stand out? How do we be ourselves? How do we find our truth? How do we know our values? How do we know how those are different from others while still staying connected?
Yeah.
This, I think, is the eternal or certainly long human journey of staying a member of the tribe while still being able to be who you are.
Yeah, that's it. So my long description comes down to that.
I think also something that just popped up for me. What's to say that the Instagram feed that you see that is perfect? Who defines perfect as well? Because, and Sarah was saying dysfunctional family, and I went, well, if we look at it through that lens, what makes a family dysfunctional versus this picture is perfect, but who defines the perfection? So isn't it just a matter of what's perfect in your view from where you sit at the table? Is this the perfect thing for me and my family? Couldn't it be framed that way as well?
Oh, I think that's so beautiful, Thorin, because I think ultimately that's being grounded in yourself, right? Knowing that your definition of what's okay, what's a beautiful moment, what is a beautiful experience is determined in the moment by you. Right. Hopefully less cluttered by these external things and more grounded in the internal. Because we can't how do we enjoy a picture on Instagram or a projected view that we have of what we see on Instagram? It is a story we tell ourselves in our mind. Right. And so how do we stay out of the projection and in the moment?
And we have to remind ourselves that's the highlight reel.
Yeah.
It's not every moment. They're only putting their highlight reel. My husband and I have talked about it in the past where he's like, oh, look, they're having so much fun. And I'm like, yeah, but they almost got divorced last year. Let's not forget that. That's a drastic example. But my point to him is that's the highlight reel. And I think we get so wrapped up in it, we forget that when we're doom scrolling, whether it's Facebook, TikTok, or Instagram, whatever it may be, that we are only seeing the very best of the best. And that's not the full reality. As you said, we have a pulse. Things don't always go our way. Sometimes we fail. Sometimes we feel sad. And that's okay too. And honestly, for me, I wish people would show a little bit more of that. Show me real life and not just the highlight reel.
I could do that for you.
Okay.
TMI.
Do that this Christmas.
I think a lot of it too, like you were talking about expectations. So I'm thinking about two things as you're talking, Thorin. I'm thinking about expectations, which is something that you identified, and the other is projection, which is what we project onto these reels or these faces or these people or these pictures.
Or their experiences even.
Yeah. And I think about, you were also talking about, Mary references too, about how do we, what's real? And I think about there's a Buddhist definition of suffering. They say that in life, pain is inevitable and suffering is optional. And suffering is the distance between reality and expectations. And that's not expectations like, oh, I expect my children to behave themselves. Those are the subtle, unconscious, projected expectations about what my life should be, or where I could be if I tried hard enough, or what I wish things were. And so trying to deconstruct those expectations so that you can bring them closer to reality. We can't move reality closer to them. We can only move them closer to reality. And if the reality is that you're struggling with loneliness or disconnection or recent disruption in your family or disruption in connection, that's your reality. And getting caught up in an Instagram projection of what it could be or should be or expectations is going to cause you a lot of suffering because the distance between the reality and those expectations is going to be great.
That's why I'm traumatized by Christmas tree decorating with my family because I have this vision, when they were smaller, this vision of getting the real tree from Housatonic Valley Regional High School from their Christmas tree sale and setting it up and making the hot chocolate and having the cookies and have the kids picking out their favorite ornaments and having the Christmas music on and the candles. And invariably, it's a shit show. And they're all fighting and they laugh about it now. But in the early days, that vision was so... Like I was locked and loaded on that vision of decorating the Christmas tree. And every year it never delivered. Now at the end, I just put the curtains out. I'm like, have at it. I'm going to have a glass of wine. So anyway, I definitely, I do think also this, I'm going to bring up Aristotle.
Okay.
That you have to live through situations to know how to handle them better the next time, the practical wisdom. And I feel like that's one area of the holidays I have improved a bit, is that I assess, I tweak, and I come up with different ways to head into the holiday season because of what has gone before, the accumulation. So I feel like that's something in that self-compassion category, that you have to go through it once, twice, 3 times till you figure out how to make it work for you on some level.
I think that's so great because it goes back to what you were talking about before about resilience, right? That not only have you lived through a number of Christmases now that you have figured out how you want it to be and what to hold on to and what to let go of, but that we also develop resilience along the way. And we show ourselves that we can get through that chaotic, crazy, screaming, crying Christmas tree decorating, and everything was okay.
Yeah, the tree got decorated.
The cookies got eaten.
You live to tell about it.
Exactly.
The hot chocolate got spilled and it got cleaned up. And it doesn't just have to be around something that you know, like the holidays, because if you're going to be doing something different this year or with different people, just reminding yourself that you have a lot of resilience to draw upon. It's not always just about, I've run a half marathon, so I know what to expect this time. Maybe you've run a half marathon, but this time you're doing something completely different. You can still draw upon the fact that you've run a half marathon. Hey, I've done harder things than this. I've faced more challenging afternoons than this one. I can do this.
That is a good one.
Yeah, that could be my mantra this year. I'll need a new one for next year. What about compromise? Like we talked a little bit about having your non-negotiables around the holidays, things that, whether it's going to a service or having, watching a particular movie or family taking a walk or whatever. How do you, because Thorne and I were talking about this, you have such this influx of people coming together for a short period of time. How do you acknowledge other people's non-negotiables without giving up your own? Okay, that's a hard one.
I think that those moments actually happen less than we fear they will. And so I think sometimes we can write a lot of anticipatory, scary or negative or projection stories in our head when in the moment we don't actually have to figure out or deal with a situation that's really going to be that fundamentally scary or provocative or volatile. It's not to say that those things don't happen. You can be true to your values and allow other people to be true to theirs. Whether or not they have to come careening and crashing into each other is a real possibility that's not going to happen.
Right.
And that you can steer around it, whether that's pacing yourself, whether that's around, like let's just say you come from a large, complicated family with in-laws and new wives and step-parents, and it feels overwhelming, and maybe it feels too consumery, or maybe it feels too just emotionally triggering and overwhelming, triggering of negative associations from your history with your family, or even things that have hurt and disappointed you. You can still look at that whole, maybe it's a series of events over a number of days. You can still maybe pick one or two that you choose to connect with, right? Maybe that's, hey, I'm going to come over on Tuesday and bring a big bunch of bagels and cream cheese, and I'm going to, do that part of the experience. And I'm going to bring something that's generous and, giving. And that's what I can do. It doesn't have to be everything all the time, because I think if we think that that's what it's got to be, we will become emotionally exhausted, feeling like we're living on other people's time frames and other people's values and other people's traditions. We can pick and we can choose, and if the people get angry and hurt, we can actually make room for that and allow them to be disappointed, right? We may be hurt about something from the past. They may be disappointed if we don't come. It's okay. We can maybe hold space for that.
And I like what you said about fantasizing or catastrophizing before it's happened, and painting this whole scenario that's in your imagination that then defines how you go into something.
Yeah, that's right, because I think, and for some people this may sound a little hokey, but we do it unconsciously, and I'm just talking about it in a hokey way by bringing it conscious, which is, what is the intention you're bringing, right? So we might say, oh, that sounds really hokey, bringing an intention. What is that? That's just kind of very woo-woo or something like that. But we do it unconsciously all the time, whether it's in the negative storytelling we do, whether it's in the anticipation of catastrophe, or that we're going to say, well, this is the way this relative or that person's going to react, so this is what I'm going to do. And we write out these whole boxing matches that haven't even happened.
It's exhausting.
It is. And then before you've even left the house, you're like, oh my God, I'm tired already. So how can you make that intention much more conscious and within your feeling more empowered, so that you say, oh, I'm going to go to this family event, or I'm going to go to this traditional thing that we do, and I'm going to bring with me the intention that to the best of my ability I will participate. To the best of my ability I'll have an open heart and an open mind. And if I do hit that boxing match that I could have catastrophized in my head, well, I have my car keys, or I can leave, or I can step back and let them box, and I can just be a witness. There are so many choices I can make. It doesn't have to be this full-in participation. I can still make small choices, not just the big choice to go, but within that choice, I can make smaller choices about how I want to navigate.
So we're at that time.
Already.
We're at that moment
That was
where
quick.
we asked Sara, are the holidays even worth it now? If you had one small piece of advice for someone to get through the holidays with a little more moxie or grace or sanity, what would be...
Or to take it into the new year.
Or to take it into
for
the
New
new
Year's
year.
resolutions, or,
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Thora, not just in terms of New Year's resolutions, but a lot of these things we're talking about are heightened in the holiday period. But there are dilemmas and moments we have to meet all the time, just maybe not so magnified or within this framework. If I were to say something maybe condensed, it would be, maybe I said this earlier too, is don't cut your nose off to spite your face. Don't make things an all or nothing if they don't have to be. And a lot of life is not an all or nothing moment.
Right.
But we can project that it is, and then we write that story, and then we buy into it, and then we play out our role in that story. But it doesn't have to be. So I would say we're mammals, we're humans, we're about connection, we're herd animals.
Right.
We want to be close. If that means you have to think through who you're close with and finding your tribe, then find your tribe. It doesn't have to mean a break with other tribes that you also belong to. Find connection, find your truth, find a truth, find a value. Be authentic. I don't believe in lying, and I'm a big fan of the truth. So find something inside of yourself that's a real value, that's a real authentic thing that you want to hold on to, and move forward with that. If you're going to an event or you're participating in an old family tradition that doesn't really have the same meaning to you anymore because you've opted out of a religion or you've changed your values, but you still want to participate in a tradition, go. Do it from a place of a desire for connection.
Amen.
That's a good one. You wrote that down?
God bless us, everyone. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today, and I feel better armed.
I feel I was stressed earlier. My eyes stopped twitching.
We can get through the holidays.
You can. I just my list seemed simplified.
We have done harder things.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks again.
You.
Thank you.
So, Thorin, feel better equipped for the holidays?
I do. I feel a little less stressed. I have some helpful tips, obviously, that I wrote down, and I have seared in my brain that I will try to incorporate. But there were so many points that Sarah made and so much helpful information. But the one thing that she was talking about at the very end really resonated, and that is that we carry this stuff with us throughout the year, and it's just on steroids during the holidays, whether it's Christmas or Easter or Flag Day, whatever it may be. So I think if we remember that and give ourselves a little grace, that will help to a large extent and to help us navigate whatever that emotion is or whatever preconceived notions we have or societal pressures or whatever it may be, and kind of embrace ourselves as well as our differences, but also our commonalities and what the things we have in common.
Yes, I really like how she emphasized that we are a herding species.
Yeah.
Not hurting, but a herding species, that we need each other.
Yes.
And to focus on, what was that phrase that she used to complete every sentence? Just like you.
Yes.
So that I value family just like you. And then we can go from that little piece of commonality and build outward from there. So exactly. I really like that.
Yeah, instead of harping on the things that differentiate us, what also makes us the same, and to find that common ground, I think will be very helpful to so many people. And one of the other things that she said that I think we forget too is that everyone has something going on, or maybe you said it, that we forget sometimes that people have things in their lives, whether it's visible or not, and just to remember that too, especially during the holidays, because they might be heightened as well.
Yeah, and they're hiding them from you, potentially. Mm-hmm. And I also liked coming to the holidays with different parts of ourselves from the past and our inner children and the different roles that we've played. And even though we might be completely a different adult, right, all of that comes spiraling back when we're together over the holidays with family. So that I thought was interesting. And
then I think also maybe that resonated with you was the non-negotiables, because we brought that up many times, and how to negotiate your non-negotiables where other people also have their own non-negotiables, and how that factors in. Because I think a lot of people may feel like, okay, well, my spouse wants this and my mother wants this, so what happens to me, what I need during this time, and try to navigate that, which might be the biggest part of it all, right?
Yeah, and identifying and finding ways to exercise your values. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I thought that was really interesting to remember what is important to me and how can I manifest it during the holiday season. So overall, I think a very productive episode to end 2024.
Yeah.
And I think
Certainly.
people will emerge from the holidays having kept their sanity thanks to us.
You mean Sarah?
All right, maybe her.
But also, as we were also discussing that going forward and, looking to close this year out, what are the things you want to take into the new year?
Yeah.
And Sarah left us with some sound advice there. And I think, for me at least, I like to take this time of year to find a quiet moment to think about the year that's passing, and then look to the future and what are some of the things that I would like to bring forward and what are some of the things I'd like to change.
Yep.
And I think a lot of what she said could be incorporated into that. And mindfulness is certainly something that she brought up many times. And I think there's so much value in that. So that's something on my list for 2025.
Right. Well, I'll hold you to that. All right. Well, happy holidays to you.
Happy holidays. Can't wait to see you in 2025.
Exactly. Same here.
This episode is proudly sponsored by Main Street Magazine.